I really wanted to see just other examples using the framework, because I think the framework that kind of takes off of Metroidvania, but then adding in more tactical elements and more thoughtful combat and level design, I think really has a good framework. In games you didn't think that we'd play, we have Souls-likes, which is usually the kind of thing that you don't assume that we're going to play, because of that...
I think at this point, it's something they assume you're gonna play.
Well, I always figure that they're going to assume that we won't because of the game that shall not be mentioned. Anyway, we have other games that are in the genre that I've been playing, and one that you've actually played a little bit of. So I thought we'd do a little bit of a roundup. I wanted to start by talking about one that I have completed and went back and started playing New Game Plus on.
Wow, good job.
So apparently it's the one that I liked. I started playing 2 games in tandem, but this is the one that I really focused on more, and it's called Steelrising. Steelrising is created by Spiders. Spiders is a very interesting company because it always feels like they're like a AA studio that kind of does takes on some AAA titles a lot of the time.
Didn't they do Greedfall?
They did do Greedfall, and you might notice that Greedfall does share some similarities to like Dragon Age. In similar fashion to like when they did Mars Warlogs or Technomancer, it reminded a lot of people of like Mass Effect, you know. There's a little bit of funkiness to how they present it, but Steelrising was basically their take on the Souls genre. And what they decided to do was create a narrative that was sort of like in a more like steampunky version of revolutionary France.
I mean, that is generally where steampunk is, but, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's always in the revolutionary France. So what happens in this game is that you play an anima. They're basically like automatons that were created in this world. And you're playing, surprisingly enough, her name is Aegis. And you are tasked with basically being the protector of Marie Antoinette at this time.
Oh, okay.
I don't know how good a job you do at the end, but at any rate, the idea is that there were all of these like statesmen that have gone missing, and it's your goal to try and find them and find out like what is going on behind the scenes. And so you go through various areas of a very war-torn, civil war-torn France. That is now populated with all of these other kinds of automatons that have gone crazy and started killing a lot of people.
So is this like Nier Automata?
It has
Souls-like?
It has a little bit of that, although I do have to say that I think that they made a really smart decision in terms of the mechanics, and maybe the reason why I didn't have as much of a problem with this as some other Souls-likes. I feel like, even though I didn't play it, I think that they took more of the Bloodborne approach than Dark Souls, if we're talking about From Software. The difference there, as a lot of people will mention, is that in Dark Souls you have a big focus on blocking and parrying and all of that good stuff, because they give you the shield at the start. Bloodborne, they take that mechanic away immediately. You don't have a shield. So they make it clear that blocking is not a focal point. This is about dodging and hitting. This is about much faster, much more streamlined combat where it's not really focused on shielding yourself. So at the start, you don't have a lot of weapons that have shielding even as a property. So you're dodging, you're weaving, you can jump in this. That's great.
That's impressive.
Yes. You even get moves where you can air dash, so you can actually jump and then you can dodge essentially in air. So it makes combat feel a lot more streamlined and not tanky. Like you actually have a lithe character that's able to move and attack like you would imagine you'd want a character to attack. And so they give you some neat stuff up at the beginning, some neat weaponry. You have these, like, I think the thing that I took originally were like these metal fans.
Okay.
So they're almost like the Mademoiselle fans that they used to use, but they're made of metal, and you can cut people with it. So
Yeah, they're Steel fans.
they're steel fans.
They're War fans.
Yeah, exactly.
I've played enough Dynasty Warriors games to know that those are a weapon that they use often.
Yeah, exactly. So there is that. And then, like, I ended up getting a Bastille edition, so the special weapon that they have is one that I actually ended up using more than anything else, which was a discus on a chain. And that's basically a big ball that has, like, these, this blade around it that's on a chain that you can chuck at people. And so,
Okay.
so you get range.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of magic involved in this too, so you have elemental weapons. Some of them take the forms of pistols, so you can shoot basically bullets of frost at people and
Perfect.
fun stuff like that. Yeah. Halberds, but then the halberds also have like a gun in the back of them, stuff like that. You have a lot of
Seems
options.
like the worst place to put it. You want to put it on the front,
or
where you
the,
can stab them and shoot them.
or the best. Yeah, well, I think it's like a special move, so you actually can turn the thing around, basically.
Yeah, why would you want to put the blade anywhere near you?
Exactly.
Yeah, no, why would you want to pull it back towards you to turn it around and shoot?
Well,
That
yeah,
seems
yeah.
counterintuitive. You do what the Warhammer Custodes do in 40k, and you have, your halberd. It's got the spear, the blade on the end, but it has a gun on the end too.
Oh, a gun on the end too.
Yeah. So instead, you basically have a gun on a stick with a bayonet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That works too. That
Yeah.
works too. Not a lot of customization in the weapons, but you do find new ones, and you find equipment that you can put on too, and some of it is just better at doing just basic damage reduction or frost reduction, anything like that. The system in place is going to be very Souls-like, which is basically you defeat enemies, they drop a currency that you can then, invest in either getting equipment or upgrading your weaponry, or invested in actually gaining levels and putting it into one of several different stats that you have. So all of those mechanics, very, very much Souls-like in its framing. It's the one currency that's used for everything. If you die, your de facto souls, your anima in this, gets left on the ground. You have to recover it. If you don't get back to it before you die, it's lost to the ages. So you don't do that, basically.
I'm not a fan of that mechanic, and I think it's one of the things I hate about Souls-likes. And they actually did one of those things in World of Warcraft Shadowlands in the Maw, where you collect the currency Stygia. And if you die, you drop like half of it.
Yep.
And it's on your body unless you go recover it. And I'm like, this is annoying.
It can be. Yeah, it sure does.
It's definitely
so
something
many.
I don't like, especially when it's the currency or what you need for leveling and abilities and items. It's the one currency.
Yes.
It's like, this is dumb.
Yeah. And I think that that's one of the big problems that a lot of people have with Souls-likes. Now, they do get around this a little bit because often in chests and just like drops on different characters, there will be essence bottles, which you can use for instant anima, essentially, that you can use at any time that stay with you. But yeah. And they do also try to do something where when you go to the save points where everything respawns and everything, you have boutiques that are right there, and you can use that as your buying and selling place where you can get stuff. And they will let you actually buy some of these bottles at a little bit of a markup to what you would normally get for the anima when you use it. So
yes,
kind of...
Do you remember the old days of Diablo 2 and corpse running?
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And you know how that, like, your body would be there with all your equipment on it? So getting to the point where you died was kind of hard because now you're just running there naked.
Yes. Terrible mechanic.
Yeah, there's a reason that it was abandoned in most games.
Yeah, exactly.
So...
Yeah. Well, apparently Souls-likes picked that back up, so there's that.
I mean, at least you don't drop all your equipment when you die in Souls-like.
No, you don't. Oh, boy, I'll tell you. There's probably some that would try to do those, and I don't think that they would succeed very much. I always worried about, like, dropping your equipment and stuff. I think I might have played one or two that actually tried that. I don't think it works very well. But anyway, yeah, so you get to that, you have the boss arenas and everything, and it does ask you to think a little tactically about it. I will say, though, that when you do New Game Plus, and considering how powerful you are, and that the enemies don't seem to power up very quickly, I was able to come up with builds where I can kind of take down even the bosses in a matter of, like, a minute. Because by that point, like, I've invested so much in power, and I have, like, the double or quits mod, which basically doubles all of your physical power, but you also take twice as much damage. But if you just smack them a few times in the head, or use a ranged attack to make them fall back, because it also doubles your ram damage, then all of a sudden it's like, well, I keep knocking the enemies prone, even the guys at the end, so as long as I don't get hit, I'm all set. And as I said, you are more agile in this game than you are in a lot of Souls, so it's easier to do so. But in general, the framework of the levels is similar. You have a carriage that takes you between the different areas, and then you do the old Souls-like thing where I reach a place where I can, like, knock down a ladder, or I can open the door from the other side so that I can access it easier in the future, and that's all there too. But I think that the framework of it and how they presented it was engaging enough. That's the reason I ended up playing it through to the end, and not nearly as frustrating or difficult as a lot of Souls-likes are. There weren't, like, difficulty settings, but the one that is just by default also allows you to kind of, like, explore a little bit, do a lot of side quests and stuff, and just kind of get used to the landscape. So overall, I thought Steelrising was surprisingly good for what it is. I even played the DLC content, which is fine. You don't need it if you play it, but it was fine. I think I liked the ambiance. I liked the setting more than anything. This idea of, like, these robots brought to life by magic in revolutionary France when everything is on fire and broken down, and going to these famous places like Versailles, and all over Paris. It was very interesting. The other one, though, I think you would probably like more, considering that you just told me about Souls mechanics you don't like, which is Asterigos Curse of the Stars. So this is a game that actually takes a lot of cues from like Greek and Roman mythology. And you're going to the city of Aphis, which is now a cursed city, as this shield-bearer warrior named Hilda. And right up at the front, not gonna lie, game looks great. Like, the second you get in, I'll try to throw up some of the graphics. Like, Steelrising looks good, but, like, I like the art style that they did of Asterigos, and it's also really bright. A lot of Souls-likes are very gray.
Yeah.
This is not. One of the unique mechanics that they do in this, though, is they have you equip 2 different weapons at a time that you can access at the same time. You don't switch between weapons. You have abilities for one weapon and abilities for another weapon, and you can use them in different kind of combinations. Okay. So it's not just like, I'll use this weapon for this application, this weapon for this application. You assign 2, and then you can utilize those 2.
A la, like, Devil May Cry.
More like that, yeah. And, intriguingly enough, instead of acquiring weapons over the course of time, they pretty much give you the 6 weapons that you have at the beginning of the game. Like, you start with the sword and shield. They give you the intro quests where this little squirrely kind of creature has taken the rest of your equipment. You track down the squirrely creature. You recover your equipment, and you get your other 5 weapons, and that happens in the span of the first 5 minutes of the game.
Oh, okay.
And then you have these 6 weapons. 2 of them are more like agility based, 2 of them are like heavy weapons, and 2 of them are magic weapons, basically. And you can determine how you want to utilize them. They have, weak attacks, or fast attacks, I should say. They have charged attacks, and they also have a special attack for each one of them. And you can utilize 2 at any given time and figure out what your strategy is. And also, you acquire different kinds of elemental abilities that then go on to those. So at any given time, you might want to have fire or ice or magic, etc., that is equipped for your weaponry. That's actually how they unlock new areas more than anything. There's a magic fire. How are you going to take care of that? Well, you got to unlock the frost element, and then you can use the frost element in order to get past that. There are these corrupt vines that are all over the place. It's going to damage you if you go over it. Oh, but if I had fire, I can then set that on fire, and now I can access that new area. That's how they open up the world.
Okay. Sounds kind of like Soul Reaver.
Yeah, it's going to have little Soul Reaver-y kind of stuff going on. Now, where this diverges is that currency thing that we were talking about before that you said you didn't like.
Yeah.
Well, they don't really do that in this.
Oh, good.
What they do is...
Game of the year.
Very good. Also very fast, and has a lot of interesting combinations you can use. I'll talk about that in a second. But anyway, what they do is when you kill something, you gain experience, and then you also gain a currency. So, when you die, some of your currency is lost, but you don't lose it all. It also doesn't stay on the ground. So you don't have to go back and recover anything. You just lose some of it. A la Borderlands. Think Borderlands. Where,
you
have
to pay to get resurrected.
Yeah, you pay a percentage of what you have on hand when you resurrect. Okay. It's like that. But your experience is completely separate from that. So you don't lose experience. So you'll level up as you gain enough experience. That's not tied to your currency at all. Your currency is used specifically to upgrade your weaponry or buy supplies. That's it. That's all you do with it. Experience is then used to increase your stats and give you some special abilities in a skill tree. And then that skill tree is based around the 6 different weapons, so you can determine if you want to upgrade or give new abilities or different kinds of effects to different weapons that you're using.
Okay.
Pretty straightforward, actually. Pretty basic stuff. In general, the way that the world is constructed in this kind of cursed landscape is very interesting. I liked how it was constructed. I did find that the easiest thing to do was to equip the wand and the bracelets, which are both the magic weapons, and just try to set everything on fire, or freeze everything in place, which is stuff that you can do. It's usually easier. I also found that with the bracelets, which aren't necessarily the weapon everybody would go to, everyone's probably thinking about using the axe or the daggers, and I get that, but there's a special ability where you can just set landmines down, and you can eventually get the ability to have them home, like homing landmines. And so, when I confront enemies when I'm playing the game, I'm like, okay, before I rush in, I'm gonna set down as many landmines as I can. They'll fade over time, but if I can set some down and then provoke them, I can usually get some good hits in on them when they come near you. And the other reason I use the staff is it's one of the only ranged weapons in the game. Otherwise, when you have flying enemies, which they do present, they have harpies and stuff like that. They get a little bit tricky to deal with in that regard.
I can imagine.
Yes, exactly. That they also have a vault maneuver in this one, so you aren't specifically on the ground, and the combat is a lot faster than you'll probably used to in a lot of Souls genres, but I would say that it is less of a Souls-like than Steelrising, for the reasons that are mentioned above. Overall, I liked it. I thought that it was good. It's a better take on it than I've seen in a lot of recent ones.
Would you consider it more akin to a Devil May Cry type game than a Souls-like game?
I think that it borrows something from that aspect in that it's focused on having, like, maybe faster or, bigger combat. You'll usually get, like, a few different enemies attacking you at the same time, and it might not be as tactical, but you do still have to dodge and weave and all of that good stuff. Not nearly as, like, over-the-top, flying through the air style points sort of stuff that you have in Devil May Cry. So not really that. I'd still say that it's more of a Souls game than a Devil May Cry sort of game, but it feels like it's trying to edge a little bit more onto maybe the adventure-y kind of game side. Even in the style and the look of it, it feels like it's taking some real pointers from almost Zelda, but in more of a Souls-like framing.
Okay.
Even Hilda herself, like, immediately when I saw Hilda and the character model, I was like, this reminds me an awful lot of Phoenix from Phoenix Rising. Like, the same kind of look and style and a presentation as that game, but as a Souls-like. Even the enemies have almost like a cartoony sort of, like, wash to them, even though it's trying to be serious. It's got that kind of look. So that one's pretty good, and I'm working my way through that. I think if I had one criticism of that one, it would probably just be that some of the enemies just start to feel like they're damage sponges. It's that kind of thing. And when they do introduce flying enemies, considering that you don't have a lot of ranged options, it becomes a little bit tricky to figure out how you're supposed to deal with that. I have one big bad harpy, like one of the big harpies, that I've tried to deal with several times, and they just throw a bunch of feathers down at me and kill me almost instantly, like real fast. Now, luckily, they do kind of give you multiple quests, so you can go off in different directions. Again, very different from Dark Souls, where they're trying to hone you in on one direction. But being able to go in different directions and try different things is kind of a nice change of pace. So I was like, well, I'm going to step away from that. I'm going to go in this other direction, and now I'm going down into the mines instead of going up into the amphitheater. So yeah, I'm not a big Souls fan. In terms of what spawned the genre, maybe not the From Software thing, but I kept thinking to myself that the genre itself has legs that are worth exploring, and that I really wanted to see just other examples using the framework, because I think the framework that kind of takes off of Metroidvania, but then adding in more tactical elements and more thoughtful combat and level design, I think really has a good framework. I just didn't like how it was originally presented with, like, Demon's Souls, Dark Souls, and etc.
Yeah, that's kind of a similar feeling to me, though. I think I like them less than you do.
Yeah, which actually I wanted to talk a little bit about, because you tried Code Vein, which I've played.
I did, and I honestly don't remember much about it. I'm trying to think as we're talking. I'm like, what can I talk about with Code Vein? And I'm like, I don't remember shit.
The one thing you did tell me about Code Vein that was annoying was the mapping. I think you were talking about how it was difficult to get around.
I think a lot of Souls-likes that I've tried, because I have tried several, traversal is always just, I hate it.
Yeah. I mean, they do the one smart thing in Code Vein where they do have fast travel points.
Sure, and they have a map, too, and the map is useless.
Especially when you get into, like, the White Tower, where it's just the floating city. The map is just as confusing as the city itself. But
yeah. So I don't think I had any issue. Like, the combat was fine. There were a couple times I ran into guys that were kind of hard, and you figured out how to take them out. Like, it wasn't bad, and I liked that you had a party member with you.
Mm-hmm.
Thought that was helpful.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I don't like that. Like, first thing when I got in the game, because I got it after, like, it's been out for a while. It's like, oh, hey, look, you have all this new content that's available. Here's like 5 minutes of pop-ups you have to click through to get all this content unlocked. And I'm like, don't do that.
Don't do that. Yeah, there's been so many updates at this point.
I mean, that's just, I think, Square. It's Square, right?
Is it? I think so. Can't remember now.
I can't remember. It's the same people that made God Eater.
Is it Atlas?
I don't know.
I want to say it's Atlas, but it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
But I think, like, between that and God Eater, which I've played a bit of, which is also apparently, I think it's kind of Souls-like, maybe.
Yeah, a little bit.
I liked God Eater more.
Okay.
I like the... because God Eater, for instance, is a lot more Monster Hunter.
Mm-hmm.
Except it's less going on a grand expedition that with a giant map, hunting all over it, and it's a much smaller contained arena.
Yes.
Where it's still a biggish map, but it's contained. You can't just go all over. It's a lot smaller than Monster Hunter. Maps are. Right. But I like that because it means that here you have an objective.
Sure.
Go do it.
Yeah. Right.
You know, and I like that. And the combat in God Eater I liked more, anyways, because it's fluid, all about combos and that stuff.
Right.
But Code Vein, I thought it was interesting. But,
right.
You know, I played like 6 hours of it.
Sure. That gives you a good flavor of it. You went through the mines and stuff, or the tunnels down below, and got to the...
So, yeah.
Yeah. You must have... If it was 6 hours, you probably got to the hub. Like their clubhouse or something. Like that.
I got there, and I was like, the story is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
It doesn't... I mean, like, okay, so did you beat Code Vein?
I did not beat Code Vein. I got 20 hours in or something like that.
So my guess was that your character was the king and or queen that they're talking about.
I think that's probably the truth. Probably.
They're like, oh, the Blood Queen. In my case, because I played a female character. So if you played a male character, did you have a Blood King?
Well, I played a female character too.
Okay,
I was remaking Monica from DDLC. so actually totally is anyway the Blood Queen. But there is one of the classes that you get, I think, is like Blood Queen at one point. I think they're making it more explicit.
Yeah, I thought that system of being able to like get your powers from the other people was cool.
That was neat.
The class system was neat, being able to swap it out like that.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, I was just not really a fan of the game.
Yeah.
Again, I did put 6 hours into it. I tried it, and there were things I did like.
Yeah.
Combat was okay. Traversal was annoying.
Yeah.
Just wasn't... It didn't engage. You know?
Right. There's some neat stuff in it, but I will say, I guess another critique that I would make of all three of those games was that, traversal is usually tricky. There were some areas that are almost impossible to figure out how you're supposed to get to them. I like something that I noticed in Steelrising and Asterigos in some cases is you'd see something in the distance and you'd be like, oh wow, that looks like a thing, like that looks like something I'm supposed to get. And then you just can't figure out how the hell you get to that place. There's like you go around and you spend so much time trying to figure out like, is there a hidden wall somewhere that I'm not seeing? Like, I can go in this direction, but then it turns me around halfway through, and I can't get back to that area, and I don't know how to get over that wall or how to get into that place. And both of those games that I previously talked about don't really have a map. Like, they'll have overmaps, but not individual maps.
I don't mind if a game has stuff that's hard to get to, as long as it's like it's a puzzle maybe that you have to solve to get there.
Yeah.
You know, this is why I liked games like Soul Reaver and Legacy of Kain and God of War, the original games. You know, those were a lot of action adventure, you know, hack and slash action adventure where you know, had puzzles to solve.
Yeah.
They may not be hard puzzles, but you know, they might take a bit of logic in figuring out how to put block A in point B.
Yes,
you know?
Exactly.
Something like that. Those I don't mind, because at least you can be like, alright, this is something I can come back to later, or like, instead of, again, this is where we talked about in like Skyrim or Fallout, if I find a chest in a dungeon,
Yeah.
And I'm never gonna go back to that dungeon. I'm just gonna console command hack the shit out of that thing.
Right.
Because I don't like why should I leave this loot here? I'm never gonna come back for it.
Right, exactly. And there's a lot of games that won't even allow you to, like, drop a pin or a reminder or something so that you could go back to it. You have to remember where it was.
And I'm never gonna do that.
Right, exactly. In Steelrising, there were a couple places where the gates are down, and you can see that there's, like, a chest or some kind of document that's beyond that gate. And you're like, oh, I bet I could figure out how to get there. And every time I was trying, like, oh, maybe I could get across the beams and invisible wall. Like, okay, that's obviously not the way to go. There's an invisible wall. I can't go over that way. So I've got to figure out a way around. And then it would, like, turn me all the way around to a completely different area of the map. And I couldn't figure out another way to get to that from the back. And it's like, and there's no maps. I can't look at a map and say, what's the general area that this is attached to so that I can go back. They'll have over maps where you can see the different areas you can travel to, but they won't have, like, area maps like I'm used to in a Fallout or the Elder Scrolls. But
yeah.
But anyway, so Code Vein probably not as
no.
Like, I thought it was fine, but it does fall into a lot of the same problems as Souls-likes. It's not as prominent in Steelrising, and Asterigos is pretty far removed in a lot of respects from the basic mechanics. But it does still have that whole thing where you gotta figure out a way around the bridge to lower the bridge so that you can go across the bridge in the future and get back to the previous. So it's got a lot of those mechanics in it, and still pretty heavy on trying to do tactical combat, which I don't mind, because I think we even talked to Chris about that. It's kind of a rhythm game.
Yeah,
you have to figure out.
It's 100% a rhythm game.
Yeah, where you're like, okay, the enemy makes this attack, this attack, this attack, and I need to know that they're making those attacks, and then I go in and attack.
Well, with Dark Souls specifically, even the music helps.
Oh, right, because, like, the boss music will even kind of explain rhythm, right?
Yeah, it'll absolutely, and it was super interesting to learn that, but I'm not playing an action game to be a rhythm game, so...
Exactly, we're not playing Dark Resolution, or whatever, instead of Dance Dance Revolution, yeah. I would love to see a Dance Dance Revolution version of Dark Souls, though.
Listen, I'm sure somebody has played Dark Souls with a DDR mat.
Oh, and more power to them, but I ain't gonna do it, no. I couldn't even play DDR with the DDR map, so, you know what. So, I guess I would pass a question along to everybody else, which is just, do you engage with any Souls-likes, and what is your favorite one?
That's vague. How about you ask if they've played any of the ones we've talked about?
Oh, okay.
If they like them.
Fine.
Because obviously, people like Dark Souls.
Okay. So, have you played any of the ones that we're talking about, and what are your thoughts on those? Code, just to recap, we're talking about Steelrising, Code Vein, and Asterigos. There you go. One of those. Have you played those?
There you go.
You have to tell me, though.